that AI can use those brain patterns to start generating images that it thinks that you are watching. And in a lot of cases, what you are watching and what you imagine have similar neural patterns. So you can start to imagine being able to project your thoughts through generative AI and create paintings, create, mind shows, anything you can think of that would come out of that. And honestly, I don't think that we're that far away.
We're going through something absolutely historic.
Technologies across the board are growing exponentially.
It's a disruption that's going to completely redefine the way businesses compete.
In the next decade, we're going to lose 40% of today's Fortune 500 companies.
The exponential growth of computing is continuing.
AI is nowhere near its full potential.
Whether you like it or not, that the future cannot be stopped by anyone.
Welcome back to another episode of Future Tech and Foresight. So a few weeks ago, I had a guest on, David Moses, and he and I discussed the potential of neurotechnology and specifically the therapeutic and kind of future benefits of invasive brain-machine interfaces. So there's actually also an entire other side of this fascinating technology that isn't invasive, where you more or less just put on a wearable device to get the benefits of this neurofeedback. But what kind of benefits can actually be obtained, and what kind of devices are out there? So personally, shortly after learning about Neuralink, I first heard of non-invasive neurotechnology, strangely enough, coming out of Facebook. So though Facebook eventually stopped its research into this technology to focus more on the metaverse, to myself and others, it became really clear that kind of the floodgates, if you will, had opened up for a fascinating and I guess you could say somewhat terrifying new path that technology was enabling. So today, I'm happy to have on Dr. Cody Rall. He comes onto the podcast to give more of an insight into what this technology can do, what benefits it can provide, and how it may be used in the future. So Dr. Cody Rall is an ABPN board-certified Navy-trained psychiatrist and a founding member and former media director for Stanford Brainstorm. He was a former board member of the American Psychiatric Association's annual Psychiatry Innovation Lab. He completed his obligation to the U.S. Navy in July 2021 and is now pursuing the use of brain-computer interface technologies for mental health. He is the founder of Techforpsych, a media and relations company that covers advancements in technology related to neuroscience and mental health treatment. Great. Well, thank you very much, Cody, for joining me on the podcast today to talk about neurotechnology, EEG devices, and kind of brain-machine interface, kind of all in general. So thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me on, Mark. It's a topic that I love talking about, so it's really fun to do a podcast on it.
Absolutely. So the way that I like to start most interviews is just to ask kind of your general interest and how you got interested initially into this topic, because I think that specifically when we're talking about neurotech as kind of an umbrella term, many people still haven't heard about this or fully understand that it's kind of an entire burgeoning industry.
Right. Well, I'm a psychiatrist in training. I did my residency training with the Navy in Bethesda, Maryland, across from National Institute of Health at Walter Reed. And at Walter Reed, they had the most advanced brain imaging technologies in the world there. They had PET scans, FMRI, DTI. There was a 60-minute special on it back in the day where they were taking a look at veterans that were coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq after they had been exposed to IED blasts. And they were finding things in the brain that had never been seen before, including myelin sheath shearing and other things that were really sad, but also elicited this fact that there is structural altercations of the brain that create psychological symptoms. I think that was a really kind of a turning point for the general public in understanding that if you have anxiety, it really can come from structural changes in the brain. And the reason why we thought it was just purely psychological and not organic based is that we just simply didn't have the imaging necessary to actually see what was going on in the brain. And doing rounds on the traumatic brain injury ward and working with neuropsychiatrists that were meeting with the president and all these just very fascinating things made me so interested in brain imaging. And that's really where my fascination with the brain and imaging started. And that sort of progressed into brain computer interface over the years as I started taking a look at different wearables and talking about them on YouTube.
Fascinating. So, I mean, we're going to be talking, I think, in large part about these wearables, these specifically like non-invasive technologies. Could you, for the I guess uninitiated, could you describe a little bit how they work? Because I think that just the technology at its heart, at a general sense, would be fascinating for some people to hear.
Yeah, well, brain computer interface is such a large topic. You've got your invasive and non-invasive. I did listen to your last podcast where you had the UCLA researcher on, and it was great listening to his take on BCI. So I think that a lot of people think that BCI is those implantable methods where you have a patient that had ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and they need to move a mouse cursor on the screen with their brain, or they need to move a robotic arm, hopefully one day. But the way that I see brain computer interface is more comprehensive, I think, where you have the ability to assess the brain with different biomarkers. And really, that's sort of the holy grail for as far as mental health treatment goes. I've become frustrated, as many psychiatrists have over the years, of having patients with complaints, but not being able to get biomarkers, not actual measures to make a diagnosis and see how well treatments are helping your patient. And so assessment has become something that is more and more important in the mental health field. So you can see where that's different than moving a mouse cursor on the screen. You could use different technologies that assess the brain, whether that be using EEG or FMRIs, which uses a harmless red light to bounce light off the blood vessels in your brain and see the blood flow, sort of like what fMRI does. And there are so many different applications of that we can talk about. But I think that some of the ones that are really breaking into the mainstream right now are sleep assessment, neurofeedback technologies, and other things that assess and train your focus during the day will be more applicable to people in their everyday lives than, people that unfortunately have developed some kind of condition where they've lost control of their limbs and their motor control.
Yeah, fascinating. So I think we're also going to be discussing kind of like what is currently available and then what is hopefully going to be available in the next little time, like in the future here. But if we look back a little bit, so you were discussing, at this with the military that you were working with, they were using some of the most advanced technology at the time. But I'm assuming that wasn't necessarily kind of like for consumers and for the everyday person. How has kind of this neurotech industry changed? Maybe you can go back, say 10 years or 5 years or so. How has the technology advanced up until today?
Yeah, it's been incredible to watch and be a part of as I've talked about these technologies on the internet. And back in the day, there was MacroSelect from China, Emotive here in the States. Muse has been around for a while. And really, if you put a sensor on someone's scalp, you get a lot of different signals, and only some of those are actual brain signals. The amplitude is really low. The problem is you get contamination from movement, muscle contamination. If a muscle contracts in that area, it's going to have a large signal compared to the actual brain signal. So there was criticism in the early days of these different wearables that were touting being able to get EEG signals and use that to help train your focus and that type of thing. And people argued, very rightly so, that these are just EOG muscle contractions that are affecting the signal. But what's really happened over the last 5 to 10 years is better algorithms to filter out noise in the signal, as well as better material science. And EEG is still a very noisy signal, but we've been able to make significant improvements to it, both in form factor as well as the software that filters out the signal. And then, honestly, I love FMRIs. I think FMRIs has a lot of potential. There's less contamination of signal when you use a red laser light to track blood flow of the brain. And that's really what Kernel has tried to do, is evolve it into a full head coverage helmet that you could use to do assessments of ketamine treatment. They've put out a paper on recently, as well as assessments throughout the day, and really unveil a lot about neuroscience and mental health that we had no idea existed before.
Well, maybe that's a great segue into kind of the applications, right? So is most of this technology focused on healthcare? I know that you've done a couple of videos and you discuss about mental health, but is that kind of generally where this is moving into? Or is that kind of what the industry is focused on, or are there other applications for this fascinating technology?
There's a lot of different companies. There's well over 20 companies in the consumer neurotechnology space, and many more that are in stealth mode and getting funding right now.
Right.
So they're all sort of trying to figure out the path to profitability because, I mean, they are a company and they need to generate revenue to stay alive and continue to develop the technology. So it really just depends on what company you are talking about. You have Dream out of France that released a consumer wearable that would track your sleep throughout the night. And what happened with them is they actually went underground for a couple of years because I think they had people whispering in their ear that this is an actual real medical innovation here that you can get insurance companies to pay for. And now we've seen them come back with the Dream 3 and working with insurance companies in the state of California now to get reimbursed for having patients use their sleep wearable at night to track their sleep, to replace the horribly outdated method of sleep studies, which is polysomnography. You expect someone to go into a cold clinic hospital room and sleep normally with a bunch of EEG leads hooked up to them. And now the technology allows you to take this soft wearable EEG system home that tracks your breath rate and other biomarkers to give physicians a better assessment of sleep tracking. So you've got stories like that. You've also got stories of NextMind out of Paris that uses signals from the occipital lobe of the brain. I don't know if you ever saw the NextMind device, but it sort of is a band around, and it's got the electrodes in the back of your head. And that one was actually bought up by Snapchat, the company Snapchat. And no one knows really what Snapchat wants to do with that technology yet, but there's been speculation that they're going to incorporate that into some kind of augmented reality headset that they're working on. And some of the ones that are really exciting right now are headphones. So there's a number of different companies working on both in-ear as well as around-ear sensors that can track your focus and help choose different songs to help you focus better, as well as cancel out external noise to help you in your everyday work life. So there's a lot of different examples of going both healthcare as well as going mainstream consumer technology.
And from what I understand, one of the kind of added benefits, or maybe one even of the main benefits of this, is that as these devices are able to kind of understand your brain to a much better level than say traditional labs, whether we're talking about the choice of music or just monitoring in general, it's much more personalized, right? So you were talking about these headphones that are able to maybe relax you a little bit by choosing the right type of music. Is that based on a much more personalized approach because of the kind of information that these devices are able to pick up?
Yeah, it's fascinating what's going on right now with the actual software with machine learning and AI. Because not only can you get crowd data to feed into the algorithms to improve the efficacy of the systems that are being used with these devices, but also you have customization by analyzing the individual user signals over the course of days, months, maybe even years. So the device knows you better and better and can respond to your needs better and better based on biosignals.
Yeah, fascinating. And I guess as you know, as we've seen ChatGPT and some of these fascinating generative AIs coming out over the last little while, people are becoming more and more aware of the possibility and I guess the overall power of artificial intelligence. And this is just going to feed into this industry to make these things, to make these devices a little bit more personalized, a little bit more powerful in their ability to tell you which type of songs or which type of activities, I guess, in the future you'd be able to do, right?
Correct. And some of this research that's coming out, even on the higher end, is downright spooky. I mean, they can take fMRI these days and feed it into machine learning algorithms and have the computer understand word by word through text what podcast you're listening to, or even visual images that you're creating in your mind or watching videos and recreate those images simply based on the brain data alone. So that's the type of technology that gets me really excited, because fMRI is sort of the highest resolution brain imaging technology that we have, but there are technologies coming along, including scaled down versions of fMRI, including FNIRS, as well as ultrasound and FNIR combinations that have a lot of potential to increase the resolution of the brain imaging technology. And then combined with AI, we're really going to start seeing some pretty sci-fi futuristic things with brain-computer interface technology, I think, within the next 10 years.
Yeah, yeah. So I've had a number of discussions with some of the audience members about the kind of concerns, not specifically to neurotech, but just concerns in general about technology. AI is always kind of at the top of the list. I'm sure you've come across issues with privacy, ethics. Could you maybe touch on maybe some of the things that you might be concerned? I mean, obviously, both of us are excited about this technology and think that it's going to be largely beneficial, but with any kind of technology, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. So I'm sure that there's some kind of concerns out there that you've become aware of.
Yeah, one of the best resources on this right now is a book that's coming out, I believe, on the 23rd of this month, 23rd of March. Nita Farahany's book. She's a law professor out of Duke, and she's spent a lot of time thinking about this. I just recently interviewed her on my channel, and her book release will be this month. You'll probably see a lot of press with her. So she's really talked about a couple of use cases that are somewhat concerning. Really, at this point, you can use EEG on a criminal, for example, and not read their thoughts. But I think this is a good use case for understanding where BCI and neurotechnology is at right now, because you can't put one of these devices on someone's head and read their thoughts thought by thought. But what you can do is hook them up to an EEG device and show them different pictures of different people. And when the victim's face comes up, they are going to have an actual EEG neurological reaction to that, most likely if they were a part of the crime scene, and they can do pictures of crime scenes and that type of thing. So you really start to get into some kind of Minority Report situation where what are the ethics behind being able to gauge people's reactions through neurotechnology. And you can do things like that with determining PIN codes, people's passcodes. So there are use cases that are becoming more and more concerning. And when I first started looking at this technology about 8 years ago, I thought that was so far cart ahead of the horse. We're not going to see this for a long time. But I've had a general sense that this is coming, and Nita's book really illustrates this very well. And she had very high-end neuroscientists review every chapter in her book and all of the descriptions of technology that she's talking about and validate that, yes, we are actually there right now. And she had this video on Instagram and TikTok that went viral because people are starting to feel like it's some kind of Black Mirror episode where we're already worried about AI, and now you throw neurotechnology into the mix, and it's got people really concerned. So I think that it's important to have these discussions. I'm not too worried that I'm going to start getting my brain hacked anytime soon, but I think the general discussion about the ethics behind these technologies is actually getting more focus on it, which in my opinion is actually somewhat of a good thing, because I think brain-computer interface technologies could help us a lot in human society. Brian Johnson at Kernel talks about human scaffolding. We've never really used the human brain to build our environment properly. How do you design a room? How do you design graphical user interfaces? How do you design smartphones so that it's actually beneficial for a human brain instead of releasing a bunch of dopamine and getting you addicted to TikTok? So these are markers that we need to better improve our society. And the more attention that comes to it, the more capital flows into it, the more talent comes into it to further develop the technology, the faster the progression goes. And I think that it's important as AI becomes more powerful, and we're going to need better means of developing our ecosystems and environments that are actually beneficial to us rather than detrimental.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe just one follow-up question with regards to the concerns, because I know that many of the audience members are going to be asking things like this. When it comes to, say, the regulatory environment, right? So I interviewed one of the metaverse pioneers a couple of months ago, and he was discussing how as the metaverse is still forming, it's actually a lot easier to implement a lot of regulations and laws before everything is actually built out, very contrary to how things were done with smartphones, for instance. Are you aware of any kind of regulation that's coming around BCI technology as it's still being developed? And as you know, I still don't have one of these devices, so I'm sure that most of the listeners, and I know most of my friends and people in my networks don't have these devices. So we're still talking about the early days here.
Yeah, again, Nita talked about this quite a bit in her book, Battle for Your Brain. And Columbia University has released a number of different proposed regulations. One of them is the right to mental privacy, is one of the foremost number one categories. And I believe one foreign country has actually introduced legislation to include that within their governmental regulations, but nothing in the States yet. It's been proposed and it's being talked about more and more as these technologies advance.
Okay, fascinating. Yeah, it'll be really interesting to track this as time goes on. So I'll probably have to have you come back on at some point in the future, maybe a year or so, and you can discuss some of these regulations and how they've been dealing with these kind of like crazy future that we're moving into. Right. Maybe let's talk a little bit more tangibly. So I know that you have used a number of these devices over the years. And you've obviously seen some benefits for yourself, but also for other people that have used it. Maybe you can touch on maybe one or two of these devices and what kind of specific personal benefits that you've encountered with them.
Yeah, I think as far as wow factor, I think NextMind was the most fun to show to my friends, just to show them, hey, you can calibrate with this device, and then depending on where you're looking on the screen, it's going to read your brainwaves and allow you to control the screen. And I think that was a really good use case wow factor for people to realize that brain-computer interface technology is coming. Personally, I've gotten most benefit from neurofeedback technologies, both Muse and Mendy. Muse is an EEG neurofeedback device that most people are probably familiar with. Mendy is a newer one that's coming out of Stockholm, Sweden, that uses fNIRS on the frontal lobe to help train your focus. Okay. What I've experienced is that with Mendy, I can get into some quite deep meditative states. It helps maintain my focus on a meditation object. And I do some energetic meditations. With the Muse training, I'm able to maintain my focus for longer periods of time and access some more energetic sensations that come from meditation. And Mendy has really helped train my focus as well, doing Mendy training 10 to 15 minutes a morning. I call it the Mendy pull effect because after you train with this neurofeedback technology, it's almost like a magnetic pull on your attention that you can take into various activities, whether that be flow state during the workday, long distance running, or meditation. It's helped as well. One of the things that I've found about these technologies, with neurofeedback technologies in particular, is that it's hard to communicate the benefits that I've experienced. I think that people that make meditation a part of their daily lives and do it every day and read a lot of the materials that are out there about Kriya Yoga and other energetic meditations know what I'm talking about. But for someone that has not had a lot of meditation experience or neurofeedback experience, it is difficult. And I was running a coaching program, a neurofeedback coaching program, using MindLift, which is a company out of Tel Aviv that uses the Muse headband. And that program was very successful. I was able to have groups of 10 people coming through. We would do group sessions. We would talk about the different neurofeedback settings and talk about different meditative strategies to enhance focus or improve relaxation. But it is a challenge to communicate mental strategies to affect neurofeedback technology, because a lot of it is subconscious. They've done a lot of papers and research on this, that it's actually difficult to consciously control neurofeedback technologies. So you have to be dedicated to it. And if you think about how hard it is for people to dedicate 15 minutes a day to meditation and create that habit, you're adding almost a whole other layer of, setting up the tech and putting it on and making sure you understand the settings and getting it connected with your smartphone and using that to enhance your meditation. which adds probably another 5 or 10 minutes on it on a regular meditation session. So
Sure.
there's a lot of challenges that come with neurofeedback technology. So I think it's going to remain a niche within brain-computer interface field. And I'm still a big believer in it, but I think that for it to go mainstream will be difficult just because people have difficulty setting a regular schedule of training as compared to even meditation.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, I mean, I've been meditating kind of the Vipassana style for 10 years or so. So I think I'll definitely have to try one of these things just as an interesting experiment and see what kind of benefits or challenges there are surrounding that technology. But I do want to go back to the first, I think it was NextMind that you mentioned. So this seems to be one of the main interests that I keep hearing about whenever I start talking about neurotech and kind of the future of technology. So you mentioned the ability to, I believe it was move your cursor, or at least control your computer to I assume a limited extent, just with one of these devices on your head, and that your friends, they have this wow factor. Could you maybe describe a little bit of the limitations or the possibilities of this technology? Again, I just had this interview with David Moses, who actually, researches invasive technologies, right? So there's I believe the word he used was the fidelity is going to be significantly greater when you actually have, the device connected to your brain. But if you can describe the non-invasive capabilities, I think that'd be really interesting for myself, but also for other listeners.
Yeah. So the way that NextMind actually works is they have to put a flickering tag on the screen that flickers at different frequency rates.
Okay.
And so the EEG signal is actually pretty robust in the occipital lobe, which is in the back of your head that analyzes visual information. And when you're looking at a flickering tag, the EEG will burst at a certain frequency, and the software can pick that up and know which flickering tag you're looking at on the screen. So it's interesting because you can set up a user interface and depending on where you're looking, be able to interact with the screen, but it's not at the level of thinking, I want to go here, I want to go there. So what he's talking about is actually, I think he was talking about motor control of the speech centers. And so that's where invasive definitely has an advantage over non-invasive, is that these cognitive processes that have smaller amplitude of neuronal activation can get picked up by an implantable, whereas with wearables, you really have to find these robust biomarkers to create the applicability. It was interesting with the advertising of NextMind because I think they went a little far. Initially, it looked like NextMind was going to be able to tell whether you were looking at a circle or a triangle and be able to navigate screens in that way. And when it became apparent that it was actually a flickering tag that was put on these different shapes, it was, okay, that's not as high fidelity as I thought it was going to be, but at least that's something. But there has been research coming out to show that you actually can use high density EEG to make out shapes just based on the brain data alone. And as the software gets better and better at filtering out noise and capturing the actual brain data, EEG, I think, is actually going to be able to allow you to look at different shapes and have different responses from graphical user interfaces based on what shape you're looking at. So this stuff is coming. It's just at a certain kind of infancy state right now. And the question becomes, well, do you really need a brain implant if you look at a shape and you can wear one of these EEG wearables and it can tell what shape you're looking at? That's actually some pretty good user cases. And you can imagine all the different things you could do with that in terms of navigating in AR and VR environments, doing different things with your smartphone. So it starts to stimulate the imagination of what's possible in the next 5 years, really. There's a company in California that is called Cognixion that's working with ALS patients. And it's actually an AR headset that also, from my understanding, uses flickering tags. But you can use that with a keyboard and have the patient look at different keys and type depending on which flickering tags they're looking at. And the problem with implantables, as you know, is there's such a large risk for infection. Crossing the blood-brain barrier is such a difficult thing to do in terms of keeping things sterile, making sure you don't get an infection, because if you do get an infection in the central nervous system, it can be very difficult to treat.
Yeah. Very interesting. So one of the central themes of this podcast as well is to discuss how these technologies don't just benefit or inhibit or limit individuals, but also what's the benefit for organizations or for businesses in the future. So I can assume maybe some sort of like meditation workshops, which I think are becoming more and more popular for corporations. But maybe there's some other insights that you can share that would be beneficial for organizations, businesses to be using these kinds of fascinating technologies.
Well, this is where some of the controversy comes in again, and going back to Battle for Your Brain, talked quite a bit about this. I was just at CES here in Las Vegas earlier this year, and there was a hard hat with EEG sensors in it, and it talked about this quite a bit in the book, where in China, they were actually having train conductors, construction workers, pilots wear EEG technology to track their focus. And so if you think about that, there's benefits for the company, making sure that their employees aren't drowsy when they're trying to fly a plane or, do what they do on locomotives. But at the same time, you have this ethical issue of, Amazon's already tracking if people are taking breaks and when they're clocking in and clocking out. And there's a lot of spyware, bossware stuff that can be installed on our computers these days to even track keystrokes. So it's like, where do you draw the line? Because they can tell with EEG, central, peripheral attention, as well as distraction. So they can tell if you're, focusing on a memo or scrolling through TikTok. So,
right.
So there's pros and cons to having that type of technology in the workplace. I think that some companies have tried to implement some sort of like brain gym, go and relax with neurofeedback technology. I think that there's some interesting use cases, but it hasn't become mainstream yet. I think that one of the things that is going to popularize this is going to be the headphones that have EEG sensors in them. There's already spin-offs from LG. There's the LG Breeze that's being used in South Korea right now. There's a spin-off from Alphabet, the Google parent company, called NextSense, that's investigating this technology. Emotive already has their M&8 earbuds out that are being used in the workplace. Okay. And I think that this is something that is being investigated, and we don't know yet really how it's going to be incorporated in the workplace. But on an individual level, it'd be great if you could have a device in your ears or headphones that was tracking your focus and give you personalized reports that was protected from the company itself to maximize your productivity and let you know when to take breaks and do the things that we talked about earlier in the podcast, like give you good songs that improve your focus and that type of thing. So it's really open-ended right now.
Yeah, it really does seem, I guess with most technologies, it is a double-edged sword, right? So there could be these phenomenal benefits for individuals, but there also could be some phenomenal benefits for the organizations if they want to use it against their employees, if I can use that kind of language. So with the name of the podcast, right, Future Tech, we've been talking a lot about what's happening now and a little bit about what happened before with this neurotechnology. But maybe we can dive into kind of what the future of this fascinating industry. So you mentioned, and I think I saw the other day, that there's only some 26 organizations out there that are actually building these consumer neurotech or EEG devices, somewhere in the range of 26 or so. Could you touch on, maybe because you're connected to all these companies, at least to a certain extent, could you touch on whether you see more companies coming in at the rate that they're coming in, and then we can also kind of move the conversation into the next kind of 10 years or so with this industry?
Yeah, a lot of these organizations are pretty small right now. So even though you're saying a company, it might only be 4 people at this point that are trying to bootstrap their technology. And I just got off a call a couple of days ago with a gentleman who's in Canada. And one of the things that I've been seeing is that there's actually been government grant money pouring into these types of startups. So I think that they got a couple $1 million just to really get up and running, which was really impressive in terms of how invested the government was in development of these technologies. So I think that governmental institutions are taking these technologies very seriously. I've spoken to the DARPA of the German government. I've heard that NASA is really serious about this technology. So there's incentive for governmental bodies to get involved and fund this type of research. And then I think VCs are becoming more and more interested as well, more and more funding coming into the space. So I think that more and more companies will continue to come into the scene. I think that probably what's going to happen over the next couple of years is there's going to be more and more acquisitions. So a lot of these smaller companies are going to get absorbed into larger companies. They're going to take on their hardware tech, their software expertise, and incorporate it into a device. And I think probably what is going to happen at some point is either the Facebook or Google, one of the big tech companies is going to probably acquire one of these smaller neuroscience companies and start incorporating the biomarker technology into AR, VR glasses, headphones, or whatever else is coming down the pipeline. So, yes, I think more and more people will come into this space. I actually hope that it doesn't become some kind of garbled mess of a bunch of different companies of 4 people that are working on the small niche applications, and it actually becomes a larger concerted, coordinated effort to bring devices that actually improve humanity to market. And I think that as we get more devices, as more people use them, we get more data, and that feeds into the AI and machine learning algorithms, improves the efficacy of the wearable devices. And then it's just sort of feeds on itself, because the better the devices become, the more interest from VCs and other funding agencies, and the more resources these companies have to further develop the tech.
With the specific companies and the technologies available, have you seen maybe one type of technology or one type of device getting more interest than others, and for that specific application?
I think there's a lot of interest in EEG and EMG in headphones right now.
Headphones,
yeah, because I think that if you look at mainstream adoption, Nita said this best when I interviewed her, that the Muse, Emotive, these headbands that I've been wearing on YouTube, I think they're cool. I think they're striking visually. It definitely raises an eyebrow when people see my videos, that type of thing. But are people really going to be wanting to wear these headbands around in the general public? Probably not. You feel a little weird. You stand out. You don't want to be. Most people don't want to be viewed as like the weird techie person that's trying the next big thing, because they're self-conscious, right? But if you start embedding these technologies into headphones or even AR and VR goggles that are more common in the everyday life and workforce, then I think that that's where you see more mainstream adoption of these technologies.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that before, with the, I guess, the social consciousness that we all have. You would think that, okay, headphones, earphones, maybe not that exciting, but it actually makes much more sense with regards to development and actually bringing these technologies into a kind of a specific application.
Exactly.
Yeah, very interesting. So okay, we've talked about kind of the different kind of technologies and the devices that are coming out. You mentioned earlier on about artificial intelligence and how that might, I guess, mix quite nicely with AR and VR technologies. How do you see, again, with the advancements in AI that we've seen over the last 5-6 months or so, how do you see AI positively and perhaps even negatively impacting this industry over, say, the next 10 years?
Well, the signal filtering is incredibly important. So obviously, if you get a better signal, that's going to improve the efficacy of the devices. But if we have limitations because the skull is blocking, that pesky skull is blocking us from that rich brain data, we're going to need some better mechanisms to filter out noise that keeps us from the pay dirt below the skull, which is the brain data. Generative AI, I think, is going to be just fascinating in so many regards. But really, there's been some research that was coming out recently out of University of Austin, for example, where they were able to use generative AI and language models to take fMRI brain data and be able to come up with, like, if a person was listening to a podcast and the AI had been trained on that person's neural data before, it could take a new podcast and have the generative AI put text of what they thought the person was listening to and achieve up to 80 or 90% accuracy, even at this level. So generative AI is creating the capabilities of text generation from technologies that can potentially be wearable and not invasive. The other thing that's coming out of it is image creation. So if you train an AI on, let's say you sit and watch 6 hours of YouTube videos, you've got your brain being scanned that's feeding into the machine learning algorithm, and then you watch a new video, that AI can use those brain patterns to start generating images that it thinks that you are watching. And in a lot of cases, what you are watching and what you imagine have similar neural patterns. So you can start to imagine being able to project your thoughts through generative AI and create paintings, create, mind shows, anything you can think of that would come out of that. And honestly, I don't think that we're that far away. I think that probably what we'll start seeing is, I think generative AI can pretty much make an image out of almost anything. Like if you gave it raw neural data, it could start creating mosaic images of what it thinks that you're thinking. And those might be kind of far off from what you're actually imagining in your mind. But as that gets better and better, I foresee some really fantastic and fun technologies where you're able to project your thoughts by using wearable technologies.
That's fascinating, creepy, and amazing, all kind of mixed together. So it might be that like the future Instagram will not be necessarily taking selfies and sharing it with people. It'll be like, hey, check out this interesting idea or this image idea that I have, or this image in my mind that I have. That's wild. I hadn't thought about that, but I don't know what to think about that. I'll have to sit and maybe meditate on that a little bit.
I think we're getting closer because we can do it with fMRI now, but that requires a giant magnet, and those machines cost $3 million.
Right.
Colonel has their total head coverage FNIRS helmet, and they don't have a use case for anything like that so far, but it's really similar technology. It's just blood flow from the cortex. I need to reach out to an fMRI scientist and see if they think that, because fMRI goes deeper into the cortical structures. So you have like basal ganglia and deeper brain structures that are being analyzed as well. So I'm not sure how much those deeper brain structures actually feed into the ability to generate text or images. But as our neuroscience improves, I think that what we've seen, and this actually was in the University of Austin paper as well, is there's a lot of repetitive signals. So you could get the same information from the frontal lobe as you would from the language centers about what someone's watching. It's sort of repeated in different multiple areas of the brain. So it does seem possible that we could just use blood flow from the cortex to do a lot of these things. And again, it really comes down to the fidelity. It might not be as accurate as if you had fMRI images of deep cortical structures, but if you had FNIRS data of the cortex, I think that there's actually a lot that we could do there. And there's new technologies that are being developed that might allow us to see deeper into the brain. Mary Lou Jepson's Open Water is working on using ultrasound to better focus near-infrared light to get higher resolution images of deeper brain structures. They've already demonstrated it with rat models. Right now, they've taken more of a clinical route. They're detecting strokes and stroke victims in the ambulance before they ever get to the hospital, so that they accelerate the delivery of very important medications that can lessen the impact of a stroke. But I think that once they have that clinical case figured out, they can raise more fundings to go towards the brain-computer interface applications, which I know Mary Lou has talked about multiple times is what she ultimately wants to do. It's just that you have to bootstrap the company through different use cases, and very important use cases at that. But so there's a lot of interesting things going on.
Yeah, it sounds fascinating, and it's such an interesting industry. I mean, it's an emerging industry, right? So it's fascinating to pay attention to, see the developments, and then also kind of like scratch your head and think like, okay, how the future is going to turn out with this. Um, maybe kind of the final question here for you, which you've already more or less described, but once these devices and this technology in general is ubiquitously adopted, right, at a very wide scale, how do you envision our future? Is it going to be the kind of part of the essential technology set that will enable the metaverse, or is this going to be a completely different isolated technology? What's kind of your vision of the future with regards to with this technology?
I think in the near term, people will make a choice whether they want to use it or not. I think more of like how many people have fitness trackers, Whoops, or Oura rings.
Mm-hmm.
It's not everybody, but it's a good amount of the population that are using fitness trackers. So I think for a while it will be like that. And then at a certain point, it'll probably become more ubiquitous. Like almost everybody has a smartphone these days.
Yeah.
So it depends on the use cases. I think that for the most part, they're going to be more of like a Fitbit for your brain for a while, which a lot of people will be into, more of the biohacker crowd and high performance, probably young professionals that, want to enhance their mental function, although I'm sure other generations will want to use the technology as well. And then there's medical applications. So my hope is that there is a brain assessment device in every clinic when it comes to psychiatric care, because the fact that we're not getting neural data and having people take psychotropic medications without being able to assess and, keep track of progress through data is just silly at this point. But I understand the roadblocks that have been there up until now. But as this technology becomes cheaper, I think that should definitely be a thing. So I see it in medical clinics. I see it being used at home for fitness tracking. I see it being used in the workplace for performance enhancement. And then when we get the higher use cases of being able to project your thoughts on the screen, it'll probably be like, hey, I've got, it's like today. Oh, probably a lot of people have VR headsets these days. They're kind of fun to use every once in a while. And it'll probably be like that for a good amount of time. Like, oh, you want to see my brain computer interface device in the closet here?
Yeah,
they're kind of fun to play with,
Yeah.
And then later on, it's hard to tell. I mean, I don't think anybody can tell what's going to happen 10 years out from now. Just the way the AI is going and the way that things are happening, it's anybody's guess. Yeah. I like Brian Johnson's philosophy with Kernel. He says, hey, we created the hardware, we've got the tool, and we don't like to make assumptions on what this is going to be used for, because I think that a good example is like 10, 20 years ago, how could we have predicted how smartphones would have been used today? So we're really in the same boat with the brain computer interface technology.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you very much for coming on. I think that's a great way to end the episode. I know that you have a YouTube channel and a website. I can have those up in the show notes. Maybe you want to talk about them for a second, and maybe describe other ways that listeners can reach out to you.
Yeah, YouTube channel called Techforpsych. A lot of long form content on there. I'm going to be creating more short form content from podcasts and different conversations I've had with people in the field. So be on a lookout for that on TikTok and Instagram, as well as YouTube Shorts. And the website, there's a contact, there's a hello@Techforpsych email. So if anybody is curious, wanting to reach out as far as discussions about brain computer interface technology, feel free to reach out. I can't get back to everybody, but I do try to respond as much emails as I can, and be happy to respond if I can. So those are the resources.
Perfect. Well, thanks again for your time, Cody. Really appreciate it. And you've certainly made me think a little bit more about this fascinating technology. I'm not sure about the future as well, but I think it's one technology worth keeping up with, as it might change a lot of aspects of people's lives and society in general. So thanks again for coming on.
Great. Thanks, Mark.
So thanks for listening to this week's Future Tech and Foresight podcast. If you like what you've heard, here are a number of ways that you can go out and support the podcast. The best way would be to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or even give a rating on Spotify, which you can find a step-by-step explanation for on the futuretechandforesight.com website. Alternatively, feel free to leave a comment either on the episode show notes on the website or the YouTube channel, where you can also see video recordings of each of the interviews. And finally, if you are part of an organization that is aware of the disruptive and transformational impact that emerging and future technologies will bring and want to know more, you can get in touch with me to hear about the strategic foresight services I offer and how I can help future-proof your organization and take advantage of the phenomenal opportunities available to survive and thrive in the future.
A lot of future-shocked people and future-shocked institutions in our society are simply overwhelmed.
Once there is superintelligence, the fate of humanity may depend on what the superintelligence does.
Science fact is catching up to science fiction.
The first truly intelligent machine will be the last invention that humanity needs to make.
The only scarcity that will exist in the future is that which we decide to create ourselves as humans.
Within a 10-year design revolution, we can have all humanity living the highest standard living anybody's ever known.
Progress is accelerating at an exponential pace, and it's going to reach a point where progress is so fast it's going to be a singularity.
We are probably one of the last generations of Homo sapiens.
Every single headline points to the birth pangs of a Type 1 civilization.